Looks like it's 1 o'clock, so I'll call this meeting to order. Welcome to the meeting of the Finance Investment Committee of the Vallecitos Water District for Tuesday, February 15th, due at 1 p.m. via teleconference. And since there's no members of the public present, I'm going to dispense with reading the notice to the public and the public comment. So with that, our first item for discussion is fiscal year 2023 budget preparation.
All right, I'll kick it off, then I'll hand it over to Wes. But we're at the beginning stages of our budget preparation for the upcoming fiscal year. So Wes is going to lead us down the path. So Wes, take it away.
Thanks, Glenn. Good afternoon. Welcome to the first committee meeting for budget year, fiscal year 2023. I'm excited to get this year started. And we all know this is the committee that makes numbers fun. At least I hope so for today's meeting. So yeah, I am excited, as I mentioned, to start 2023, and you'll see this nice little thing here. I have to edit every year, plan for 2023. But I did want to say welcome to the new year and welcome to 2 new committee members. Happy to have you guys here and happy to have you here. And hopefully, as we go through, I don't go too fast or look at things from too high of a level. If I do, please stop me. Feel free to ask any questions or ask for more detail. I'm happy to provide it. But it is going to be a lot of numbers, so I'll try to keep you awake.
Just before you get started, I just want to clarify. So the last slide, that is our official 2023 budget party slide for this
Page, yes.
term, right?
It is.
Okay, very good. All right, I just wanted to make sure. Okay,
Looks very similar to the last one. It's I've exceeded my creativity with this, so just can't, I haven't made many changes.
Eerily similar.
Yeah.
But as I frequently say, let's get started down Budget Street and Savings Avenue this year.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the agenda for today. First, we're going to go over the budget to actual, and typically we do 5 years, but we got a bonus. We're going to show you 6 years, and that'll be for the operating expenses for both water and sewer. And then we're going to go over the preliminary budget calendar. This will just give us an idea of the process internally, as well as set some tentative dates for the committee meetings coming up to help you with your schedule and see what we can do about getting those set. After that, we'll talk about one of my favorite topics, the CalPERS UAL funding. You might have to cut me off on that one if I go into too much detail. And then finally, Mike will talk, last but not least, I don't want to, last but not least, Mike will talk about the other post-employment benefits funding, or OPEB. So to get started, this is the budget to actual for water operating expenses for the last 6 years. And you can see we've done a pretty good job budgeting. We're usually 4% or less within, close to budget. In 2019, we were at 7% over budget, and that was really a result of main breaks. We had about $635,000 in main breaks that year. But in 2020, we were 1.21% under budget. And now this year in fiscal year 2021, so we're going back to actuals for 2021, just to clarify. I know we're in 22 now, but we've got the results of 21. And we're 6.61% under budget, or $846,000. I'm going to go into the detail of that, but most of that is due to like COVID. A lot of it is having trouble getting supplies or materials, or even getting contractors to do jobs. So we'll see a lot of explanations that revolve around that. So here are the water operating expenses for the last 2 years budget actual shown. You can see there are a lot of highlights on the right-hand side of the column there. And I'll go through those one by one. But the total here, that's the $846,000. And that's made up of major variances in pumping to start. Pumping is under budget by $188,000. And the main reason for that was we had a lot of arc flash labeling, which is like an electrical safety labeling that we had budgeted for fiscal year 2021. We had an issue getting all of that done, so the majority of it got pushed. It was for $120,000, and the majority of it got pushed into 2022. I think we're done at this point, but in fiscal year 2021, we had not completed it. Water quality was under budget by $110,000. And the main reason for that was we had budgeted $85,000 for a no DES flushing. And again, that was pushed into fiscal year 2022. Tanks and reservoirs was under budget, and this has got several parts to it. The first one being labor was under budget by $62,000. The meters department actually had some dead meters that we had wanted to switch out, and we had some issues with roots in the boxes and tree roots in the boxes that we needed to switch out. So we asked for help from other departments, and tanks and reservoirs was one of those departments that was grateful enough to help us out and provide some labor. So theirs ended up being lower than, and they worked for the meters department. And they also had $16,000 in SCADA upgrades that were budgeted that they had to push off to 2022, $13,000 in the arc flash labeling, and $21,000 in paving. And then transmission and distribution. This one has to do with basically being understaffed. They were down 3 staff for most of the year. So they weren't able to complete some air vac cans and upgrades that they had budgeted to do. They also had pipe supplies and parts that they had budgeted to buy and install, but weren't able to install them because they were short-staffed. And then customer accounts. This is ongoing from the COVID budget. We just budgeted very conservatively for bad debt expense. So for fiscal year 2021, we had $142,000 less in bad debt expense than we budgeted. So that's a good thing. We budgeted more to be conservative and came in under that. And they also had $53,000 under budget for materials. That was just due to the fact that we weren't locking, so we didn't have to pay for the hangers and the InfoSend charges. Excuse me. Next, we have engineering, the only department that's over budget. That's why James is here. No, I'm just now engineering is over budget by $254,000. That's actually the majority of it's labor, $240,000. But it has to do with just charging less time to projects and actually less sick and vacation time taken during the year. Next is information technology. They're under budget by $143,000. See if I can mute myself. And that's due to labor. They actually had one of their staff was out a good portion of the year, so they're under budget on labor by about $87,000. And the rest is licensing. So they saved money on Microsoft licensing, saved about $30,000. And they also saved $20,000 on maximum licensing for the year. And finally, we had G&A. G&A is under budget by $265,000. And that's really just due to less sick and vacation time taken during the year by the G&A staff. So that's the water budget to actual for fiscal year 2021. If there are no questions, I'm going to move on to sewer.
A real quick question, Wes. The items that you mentioned that were pushed into FY 22, was that because of COVID related issues, difficulty in getting contractors?
Yeah, I talked to Ed about it today, and he said they had a lot of issues with contractors and scheduling and getting parts and things like that. So the majority of it was like just getting things done in 21 for COVID reasons. You know, whether they could be on site, whether they could, you know, work in the field, or even, you know, or if we could get the parts and stuff too, I guess.
Okay.
So is it safe to assume probably that all of those things that were not able to be done due to COVID relation issues and supply chain, that we are going to push those to the next year, and we'll probably see them come up there?
Yes.
Yeah, so they're actually pushed into this year. So we're
Right.
looking backwards a year for these numbers. So you're exactly right, Director Boyd Hodgson. Those things that we didn't get done last year have been pushed into this year. So a year from now, when we're doing a similar variance analysis, you may actually see the numbers be higher than we had budgeted, because when we prepared this year's budget, we didn't know if we would finish all those things, or we didn't know the extent of COVID impacts. So we budgeted, and now more stuff may be pushed into the budget. So next year we may actually be high compared. We may or may not be, but that you may hear about these again a year from now.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so some of them actually did get budgeted in 22. Some of them didn't, depend, as General Manager Pro mentioned, whether we knew about them. I talked to Ed today, and I think he said he did move the no des into 22, so it should be budgeted in 22. But the arc flash labeling, for example, we expected to finish it last year, so that is probably going to cause an overage in 22. And as we move through the budget process, like one of the next steps is we'll do the fiscal year 22 projections when we put in the materials and services for 23. So then we'll start to see those variances, and we'll be explaining them as we go.
Okay, thanks.
So moving on to sewer, here is the sewer budget to actual for operating expenses for the last 6 years. And you can see we've been doing pretty well in the last couple of years. 1920 was at 3.83%. And this year we actually were under budget by 1.18% or $84,000. So overall, pretty good year for budgeting for sewer. Here's the detail for budget actual for sewer operating expenses for the last 2 years. And you can see there are only 2 major variances. So the 1.18%, the $84,000 is made up of the major changes from customer accounts. And again, that's the same thing. Bad debt expense was under budget by $89,000. We just budgeted more bad debt expense due to COVID to be conservative. And they also were under budget by $67,000 in materials and services. And then engineering again, they just keep rearing their ugly heads. So engineering was over budget by $206,000. Again, it's labor and it has to do with charging less time to projects. I didn't mention in the water portion, but they also helped out in transmission distribution with main breaks and stuff. So when they charge their time to operating expenses, it goes straight to operations, not to CIP, and it increases their operating budget. So those are the major variances in sewer. The other thing worth noting, though, is that treatment expenses are taken out of this analysis. And the main reason we take those out is because Encina costs are really a non-controllable cost for us. We get their bills. I mean, we get to vote on them at the board meetings and stuff, but we get their bills and we have to pay them. And Metal Arc plant, the treatment costs there, the majority of those are recovered through reclaimed water sales. So now we'll move on to the budget calendar. It's going to be a lot of information, but I just want to go through. And the main point of this is really so we can look at the tentative meeting dates that we have scheduled. So the internal process for February, what we're doing now, we updated the budget with the audited numbers. That's what we're talking about as far as the actuals. And we're starting to work on the 2022 projections. And we sent out the calendar to the departments requesting that they submit their individual department requests for operating materials. And this meeting, February 15th, we're going over the budget calendar and the budget versus actual for the last 5 years. In March, we will be putting the operating budget into the budget. So the department requests will go into the operating budget, and then we'll finish up the current year's the fiscal year 2022 projections. And we'll also start working on the payroll estimates, and we'll finalize the debt service forecast. The next scheduled meeting tentatively is March 21st, 2022. At that meeting, we should have guest speakers, Ed Pedrazzi and James Campbell should be there, hopefully. And they'll be going over our operating budget requests in detail. We'll start looking at the materials and services sheet. And those are the line items where we go down to like $100 items. So we'll really get into a lot of detail at that meeting. So if your schedule works for that, we'll send out meeting beforehand and we can always move it around, but that's the tentative date as of now. Then in April, we will have entered everything into the operating budget, and it'll be, along with the committee requests and comments, we'll be revising and refining it. And on April 11th will be our next finance committee meeting. So again, a tentative date on that. At that meeting, we'll hopefully be looking at the capital budget requests. And again, the district engineer and the O&M manager will be here to discuss those capital budget requests. We'll also have the preliminary salaries and benefits at that meeting, where we'll do the look back budget to actual for salaries, as well as the upcoming projections and future years budget. And hopefully at that meeting, we will have we'll be reviewing the operating budget changes, which will include the water cost estimates from the Water Authority if we've gotten some information from them. And then in May, staff will put together the 5-year and 10-year reserve projections, and we will actually complete the draft proposed budget. So we'll have a full budget put together for review. And then May 5th, we will have our first full board workshop. And at that meeting, we'll go over the initial draft budget and discuss any board requested items. Then in May 18th will be our second meeting in May. At that one, we'll go over the review of the proposed budget. So we'll make any changes that were discussed at the May 5th meeting and hopefully have a proposed budget at that meeting. And if there are any comments or changes, we'll make them after that meeting and bring it to the board on June 1st, hopefully for approval.
Hey, Wes, can you go back one slide? So those two board dates, you have to check on the dates because they're 13 days apart. They should be, if they're both on Wednesdays, I'm not sure which of those dates is incorrect.
The 5th is on a Thursday.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's a
so-
Thursday. So I think that's what we did last year. We had the first one on a special
Oh,
workshop.
okay.
So that's why I just put it on the same sort of tentative schedule.
Oh,
do
so
the
you're-
first one on a
okay, so one
Thursday.
may be a special board meeting. Okay.
Yeah, so
Thank
the 5th will probably spend a little more time because it'll be the first sort of going through the full budget with the board. On the 18th, I'll have already seen it. So I think we've got that scheduled for a regular board meeting.
Okay, thank you.
But we're open. We can always change it. Okay, so that's the calendar. If there are no questions with that, next we'll move on to the CalPERS UAL. You may want to
Hey.
stretch, get up, do some jumping jacks for this one because it could get detailed. I had to try to cut some stuff out of this one and summarize it, so we'll see. So as you know, the district and the staff prepared and the board approved a UAL funding policy on June 13th, 2019.
Hey, Wes, can you explain what UAL stands for and the significance, what it means?
Yes, absolutely. So the UAL is the CalPERS unfunded accrued liability. It's a liability it's above and beyond our normal cost, and it actually originated when CalPERS realized that their rates that they were expecting were not being achieved. So for years they had said they were around 8% in their original returns back in the early 2000s, and they weren't achieving those returns. So around 2012, 2013, they said, oh no, we've got this huge liability and we're not getting our returns. We need to collect it somehow. So they billed all the member agencies and everyone went, oh no, we can't afford to pay this. But it still created this liability. And I'll go into more details about that, how that liability is set up. But for us, our liability in 2013 originated like $6 million and grew to be $16.1 million by 2019. And at that time, staff prepared and the board decided to take action and actually fund that through additional discretionary payments.
Yeah, just to clarify, the district all along had been paying what we were being billed. CalPERS was telling us what to pay. It's not like we made a choice to fall behind in payments. We were paying exactly what CalPERS wanted us to pay or asked us to pay. And then they realized that they weren't collecting enough money. So we've been fully compliant with our CalPERS payments all along.
So yeah, when they came forward and said they weren't earning enough, they said, everyone, here's your new liability. We need you to we're going to amortize it. We need you to make payments on it. So then that grew. And again, we were at 16 million, but the board realized that this debt, the $16.1 million is actually a debt at 7% interest. It also has some ramping and some other sort of negative amortization in there that causes it to be more expensive. So it was a very wise decision by the board to approve paying off this debt. You can see here the approximate savings from, this payment is $13.7 million. It actually ended up being more than that in the end. But the plan was to pay $8 million in fiscal year 2020, and then paying an additional $4 million in fiscal year 2021, and then pay off the remainder in 2022 of $4 million. So the total.
I'm sorry, Wes, that was above and beyond the required payments. We paid both.
That's correct. So you can see the required payment on the second line there. That's our required payment on just the UAL. So there's also a normal cost component that's completely separate. This discussion is just revolving around the unfunded accrued liability, which is separate from the normal cost component. So they were billing us like our normal mortgage payment, we'll call it. The required payment on the UAL would have been the $1.1, $1.2 million, and then the 1.3 and the 1.5, and you can see how it's growing. And it's growing as a result of ramping and other negative amortizations that are built into it. So we paid the $8 million, the $4 million in addition to that, or there were additional payments on top of the 1.1. A side effect, though, by paying the $8 million was the $1.3 million required mortgage payment went down. So in this example, I think it went down to $763,000 or $850,000 for this $1.3 million. So we actually ended up saving on that annual payment as well. That was kind of a bonus at the time. We knew it would change, but we didn't know how much it would change by. So this was the original funding policy. After we paid the $4 million, the $8 million, and then the $4 million in 2021, part of the funding policy states that we will revisit the funding policy every year and look at the actuarial evaluations and make sure it's prudent to make these payments and that we don't overfund the unfunded accrued liability. So last year, we came back to the board. We've been working with actuaries and we found out that PERS was expecting a larger return than anticipated. So just to give you a little history before I go into that, this chart here shows the historical returns for PERS for the last 20 years. And you can see it's kind of all over the place. And I'm guessing that the reason they ran into their issue was in 2009. It's just a hunch. But they had negative 24% returns. They had a huge loss in 2009. I'm sure around then they realized they had an issue, and that's probably when they started, they developed the unfunded accrued liability. But to explain what this chart's showing, the orange is CalPERS, the actual CalPERS returns. The blue line is not the zero line. The blue line is actually their expected return. So they've set their expected returns and their projections, their actuarial assumptions for what the pool needs to earn in order for us to fund our future liability based on this blue line. So what they're saying is we expect to earn 7%. If we earn 7%, we'll have enough money to pay out our benefits in the future. If we don't, we won't. So anytime the orange line falls below the 7%, they create a liability or a loss for the district and for other member agencies. Anytime the line is above, the orange line is above the blue line, that's a gain for the member agencies and a gain for the district. So all of these are historical with the exception of 2020. And this was when we presented the fiscal year 2022 budget. We knew what 2019 was, but PERS is always a year behind. So they hadn't put out their numbers for 2020, but they had put out their returns. So they had said, we know we made 4.55%, but we're not going to give you those figures yet because we haven't finished them. And then at that time, they were also anticipating a 15% return for 2022. So this one was actual, we knew it, but we didn't know the numbers. And 15% was an estimate as of May when we created the budget. So during the budget presentation, we said, okay, our PERS estimated unfunded accrued liability was $7,690,000. With the 4.55%, since it's below the 7%, we're going to have a $1,900,000 loss. So that'll increase our unfunded accrued liability. But we're estimating a 15% return in 2022. So that we're estimating at $6 million gain. So remember, the gain is actually over the 7%. So it's an 8% gain in effect, which would result in a $6 million gain for us. So the balance we estimated for fiscal year 2022 when we presented the budget was $3,513,000. So because of that, we said we don't think we should pay the $4 million because we don't want to be overfunded. Let's take a 2-year plan. So based on this, we established 2 years to pay it off, and we decided we'd do it $2,600,000 and then $900,000 for the 3.5. So here are those numbers. And that would result in another $2.7 million in savings. So now we're up to date. That was the background. That's where we're at as of fiscal year 2022. The reason we're here today is because we have more news. And fortunately, it's good news. So this, normally what we do with the 2.6, and I apologize for this page automatically, this is where I said we make numbers fun. But normally at this point, when we pay the $2.6 million, we would bring this sheet to the finance committee to show you how which bases we fund, how we decide what to pay to PERS. We don't just send them $3 million and say, here, do as you please, like have fun with our money. They actually tell us you have to select one of these bases and tell us which one you want to pay. So we have to go through each of these, figure out what the maximum interest savings would be to pay off. Now, to explain what this is our liability, and they create new liabilities each year, and the sum of the years equals our total liability. You can see it started in 2000. Here's the reason for the base. It started in 2013. That was the first year that the PERS came to the district and said, you guys are unfunded. You have an unfunded accrued liability, and it's, you know, the it was like $6 million. You can see the balance in 2021 is $6,098,000. So from there, every year, if they don't meet their assumptions, which obviously never happens because they're never exact, they either create a liability, which is a loss, or a gain for us. So they can be positive or negative every single year, and there's up to 4 each year. That's an overview. I won't go into all the lines of the details, but the reason I'm showing this is because the balance in 2021 now shows the loss, which we estimated, the 4.55%. We estimated at $1.9 million. It came in right at $1.9 million. So patting ourselves on the back, we did a pretty good job estimating that one, especially given that the value of the assets for the pool is, our portion is like 87 million. But there's also a non-investment gain loss of $293,000 there. So when you add those to the balance, you end up with a projected balance for fiscal year 2021 that does not include the estimated 15% return yet of $9.8 million. All right, so here we are at $9.8 million with 20's results. We still don't know what the 15% will return. So we're going to go into that next, but I want to stop and see if there are any questions on this page here.
None for me. None for me, Director Boyd Hodgson. Any questions?
No, I don't have any questions right now. I think I'm following along, but keep going.
So one thing I do want to point out on this page also is the middle where it says amortization period. So I think it's important to note that these are all of our liabilities, and the longest liability, the furthest out we have, is 28 years. So if we just paid everything the way it was, we'd pay off all the liabilities in the next 28 years, but that's the full length of our liabilities. There's also this ramp up, ramp down column. We could talk about that at some other time if you want to get into it. It's interesting, but take a little while. Okay, so next. So I want to start with the kind of work to the 8.9 that we just discussed. So that's going to be the 7.6 was estimated for 2019. Plus now we know what the 2020 change is with the loss in 2020, and that's $2.1 million. So that gets us to the 9.8. And then from there, we have an actual return that PERS put out pretty recently that they achieved 21.3% return. So now this is, remember, it's over the 7%. So it's a 14.3% gain for us and for the pool. And that gain turned out to be, and I talked to the actuaries, I had to get a sheet on this because I couldn't, there's no way I was going to calculate the gain myself, because it's just, you know, $472 billion in assets. It would have been quite the task. But they're estimating that gain at $11.2 million for us. So with that, the estimated balance would actually be super funded by $1.4 million at the end of 2021. So I wish that was the end of the story. So now we have some more news. And PERS actually in 2015, they became, they made a policy which is very fiscally responsible. It was their risk management funding policy. And what they said in this policy was that anytime the returns are really high or above expectations, and they have a table for what those expectations would be, they're going to lower their expected returns or lower our discount rate. So the 7% blue line that's here, anytime they achieve really high returns, they're going to lower that rate. And it's actually responsible, because what they're saying is, now we know we're not going to get 7%, but we don't want to charge the members for that, because anytime you lower that, it costs a lot of money to the member agencies. So when they have really high returns, they lower the discount rate so that we can absorb the cost of that increase. So in 2021, when they got the 21.3% returns, the policy triggered a decrease in the discount rate from 7% down to 6.8%. So I worked with the actuaries trying to figure out what that meant for us, because I'm like, well, we got the $11.2 million gain. We're super funded. Are we still going to be super funded, or what happens? So with the $1.4 million super funding, the 6.8% change in the discount rate actually resulted in a $2.5 million liability for the district for fiscal year 2021. And in the end, our balance is still going to be an unfunded accrued liability, but it'll only be $1.1 million. So we're over 99% funded with the total value of the assets. The unfunded accrued liability is very small at this point. So staff does not believe that we need to pay the $2.6 million for the PERS. And that's the really good news, is that there's the budgeted amount for $2.6 million that we will not need to expend this fiscal year.
So Wes,
Oh,
do you have
I'm
oh,
sorry.
go ahead.
So you're
Go ahead,
saying
Jared.
that we will not make any payment, or we're not going to make the 2.6?
So I would say we shouldn't make any payment at this point because we still don't know the results of 2022. And if they have good returns in 2022, that could wipe out this $1.1 million unfunded accrued liability. And we're at 99% funded right now. So you can see the fluctuations in PERS returns, and our design, we really don't want to be super funded. So yeah, I think right now the best thing to do would be to kind of sit back and wait and see what happens with the next actuarial evaluation. And staff, and my next slide is actually this next steps. We'll review these annually. I'll stay on top of this every year during the budget process. We're always looking at the actuarial evaluations and talking to actuaries. And then we'll provide regular updates to the finance committee and to the board as we get them. So we've, in effect, I'll say, paid off our unfunded accrued liability within 99%, saved about $17 million in interest. I think it's really good news.
Yeah,
Good
so
job.
I would say for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been trying to close that UAL gap, right? That's what that's our goal. And I think we're pretty close, about as close as you're ever going to get, given the inherent variability in investment returns. So I think going forward, we'll need to start focusing the conversation on how to maintain it. You know, how much funding do we want to apply or not in any given year to keep within some band of certainty with the UAL? Trying to chase it to be zero every year, you're never going to get there. But if we can establish a band that we want to be within, that the board is comfortable with, that's probably where we need to focus our attention. And Wes, I don't know if you want to relate that conversation to the preparation of the budget. So that 2.6 million we were going to be paying that we're not going to be paying, what does that mean to budgets and maybe to rates going forward?
Yeah, so what that'll mean is that, you know, the ending reserve balances for 2022 will be higher than anticipated, maybe even in rate stabilization funds. One of the things on our strategic goals and for the tasks is to look at creating a rate stabilization fund in the reserve policy, one that doesn't just kind of fluctuate back and forth. So that's one thing that we can look at, but it will create, I imagine, rate stabilization going into the 2023 budget year, which is always good news.
Okay, well, that is good news.
So that's the end of my presentation. Next up will be Mike Arthur would like to talk about the OPEB funding, the other post-employment benefits. This is actually for retiree health. So this is not retirement expenses. This is retiree health. I used to get those confused very often when I say CalPERS, especially since they're both managed by CalPERS. But now we'll be talking about the retiree health.
Yeah, just before Mike kicks it off, it's a confusing name. Other post-employment benefits makes it sound like there may be multiple post-employment benefits. The only one that affects Vallecitos is retiree health. So whenever you hear OPEB, it's just retiree health is all we're talking about.
And Michael probably mentioned about we now have a closed system as of July 1, 2013. So there are no new members going into our other post-employment benefit plans. But I won't steal too much of his thunder. I'll let Mike take it away. Let me just see if I can get to his slides. Oh, before I go though, see you next time. Budget party page, on to Mike. I could have saved it for you, Mike. Sorry, but
Yeah.
you know.
Well, you guys already hit all my talking points, so I'm done. So as soon as he gets it up there. Okay, so as Wes and General Manager Pearl mentioned, OPEB, it's the other post-employment benefits, and I do have in there that is just retiree health because it is confusing. Go ahead, Wes. So OPEB is a closed system, as Wes mentioned. It's closed as of, I believe, July 2013. That means anyone hired after July 2013 is not eligible for the retiree health. And currently, out of our, I think we have about 102, 103 current employees, but out of that number, only 57 of them are eligible for OPEB. So those were employees that were hired prior to July 2013. And there are about, and this number changes, by one or two, depending on who retires, there's about 30 active retirees in the OPEB system. So we pay a annual amount to OPEB for the retiree health, and currently that amount is about $375,000 annually. We also have let's call it a savings account. It's a trust account managed through CalPERS. It's a CERP account, and it was established in 2012. And CERP stands for the California Employers Retiree Benefit Trust. So like I mentioned, it is basically a savings account that we put in. It's a trust account that's managed by CalPERS. Okay, I'm going to go over a couple.
Mike, real quick,
yes.
if I can, because I'm not sure if either of our two committee members fully know what the benefit is. Were you going to talk about that, or should I say it?
I can mention it a little bit.
Okay, well,
So
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Kick it off.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so when we say retiree health, what that means is we're going to pay the retirement, or we're going to pay the medical benefit costs for retirees up until they're eligible for Medicare. So if, let's say somebody retires at age 60 and they wouldn't be normally eligible for Medicare until 65. So for 5 years in their retirement, the district will pay their medical benefits. So I think it's for them. It depends on when they were hired, whether it's just for them and a spouse, and I think that's as much as it would be, just them and a spouse. But then once they're eligible for Medicare, or they have coverage elsewhere, then the benefit that they receive from Vallecitos ends. And I see Director Boyd Hodgson has a hand raised.
Thank you. Does it depend on length of service, or is it just?
No, it
how
does.
does
Yeah, you have to have a certain amount of vesting years, and you have to retire from the district. So if you're a pre-2013 employee and you decide to sever from Vallecitos and go work for another water district, you will lose that other post-employment benefit retirement from Vallecitos. So you have to have a certain number of qualifying years of service, and you have to retire from the district. And I think it's 10 years, but and James, you may know better. You've been here longer than any of us.
Yeah, I believe it's 10 years, and you have to retire from the district, as you stated.
But as
Yeah,
Mike
so-
mentioned, we don't offer that anymore. Agencies realized it was too lucrative a benefit, so back in 2013 it was terminated. So anyway, back to you, Mike.
Okay. So let me go over a couple definitions. TOL, which is a total OPEB liability. So it's kind of like the UAL in a sense, where it is the present value of benefits for past service. So if those 57 current employees, it's the cost, our liability for the benefit for those 57 employees. And then the next one is our FNP, fiduciary net position. It's basically our bank account. It's the net assets that we put in our trust account, the CERP balance. And then the next definition is, the net OPEB liability. So that's basically your assets minus your liability. So your total liability minus what is in that trust account. So right now, the present value of the future benefits for those 57 employees and 30 retirees is about $5.8 million. And it changes based on the number of employees. And also it changes on actuarial assumptions. And it's kind of like Wes went over in that mixture of UAL things. There's so many things that are in the actuarial assumptions: life expectancy, interest rates, future healthcare costs, things like that. So that number will, it changes every year. We get a new updated number every year. So our current trust balance is almost $7 million. That $7 million is made up of about $4.25 million that the district put in. And over those 10 years or so, the district has made approximately $3 million in interest earnings. And last year, I believe we made our first withdrawal from that. So with this balance that $7 million is used for, it can pay for the retirees' health. Previously, that money came out of our budget. So we would pay annually anywhere from $300,000 to $350,000 of the retiree health out of our budget. So it would be a budgeted line item. Now we're taking that money directly from the SERP balance and it's paying from there. So it has really no impact on the budget because we've already funded that money plus with the interest earnings. So what I wanted to show you is a 5-year history of our liabilities and our assets. If you look over in 2018, the left column, the blue is our liability and the green is our trust assets. So you can see we were basically 100% funded back in 2018. In 2019 and 20, pretty much the same. The late 2020 and 2021, as we saw on the PERS, the investment returns have just been astronomical, which has been great for the district. So now our SERP balance has gone up by almost $800,000 in 2021, which leaves us a surplus. If you click one more time, Wes. So right now, if you want to call it, we are, quote, super funded. We are about 119% funded, which gives us about a $1.1 million in excess funding in there.
And
However,
Mike,
those numbers, oh, yes, go ahead.
sorry, Mike, if I can interrupt for just a second. We talked about the deposits of $4 million. We had actually fully funded the OPEB liability as of 2018. I think we completed it around May or June of 2018. So there have been no other deposits to the fund since 2018. And
Right.
now we're actually, since we're fully funded, now we're withdrawing money to pay for the retiree medical costs.
Yeah, and prior to 2018, we actually had 2 line items in the budget. One was to pay for the retiree healthcare costs, and the other was to be making deposits into this trust fund. So we were paying into both, and then we stopped paying into the trust fund, but then kept putting in a line item for paying it out of the budget, the going forward retiree health, and now we've stopped both. So there will no longer be line items to either fund the trust or to fund the ongoing healthcare costs, and all those retiree healthcare costs will come out of the budget. So we spent many years putting money into the trust. Now we're going to be spending the next 20, 30 years taking money out of the trust.
And similar to the PERS unfunded accrued liability, this was a board decision to fully fund OPEB in 2018, and it's paying off.
Right, the trust so far has earned, as of January 31st, we've earned about 7% interest over the 2011 was when we first put money in. Over the last 10, 11 years, that's compounded annually, and that's much more obviously than we could have earned internally, 2%. So all those extra earnings is what's paying basically for the ongoing costs of the retiree health. And just one more slide. So as we mentioned, we will be seeking for reimbursements from the trust for fiscal year 21, 22, and actually all future fiscal years. And that reimbursement can be anywhere between $350,000 to $450,000, depending on what the bill comes from the health insurance agencies. And that's the end of my presentation. If there's any questions, I'll gladly answer them.
Yeah, real quick. Do you have a long-term projection on how the fund gets depleted versus the remaining employees?
So right now, there's probably a 25 to 30 year time horizon, because it would be, you look at our youngest employee, and this is all done by the actuarial. You look at our youngest employee and when they would reach age 65. So it's about 25, 30 years out. And at the end of that term, let's say we're already 30 years in the future, any remaining funds in that trust account revert back to the district. We'd have to have a final actuarial valuation. We turn that into the SERP, which is basically CalPERS, and if there's $1 million left in there, that money would revert back to the district.
Any projection on what will be remaining, or is too many variables?
there's so many variables. I mean, it changes year to year. Life expectancy goes up all the time. Healthcare costs, you know, you can project that they're going to go up 5%, but one year it might go up 10%. So there really is no real projection on there. The goal obviously is to kind of have those lines equal. So it's basically as close to zero as possible. And even though there's a $1.1 million quote surplus in there, we will be paying out $350,000 to $400,000 this year. And each year as an employee accrues another year of service, the liability goes up by about, I think our actuarial said by about 200,000. So just this year, probably 500,000 of that 1.1 million will be through paying off the retiree health costs and an additional benefit that's accrued by the current employees. And this is something we monitor monthly too.
Yeah, I would add that those funds, like a lot of trusts, those funds are locked up. We can't go access those funds for other purposes. We can't use them to subsidize water rates or anything like that. It's just for that sole purpose. And the only time we can get at it is at the end of the rainbow, when the last covered employees no longer need to be covered. Then whatever the balance is, then we have access to it. And I think at that point in time, it becomes unrestricted funding. We can use it for whatever.
Glenn, you mentioned on the benefit side that some get spouse covered. Was that based in some time in history when that was changed?
Yeah, I don't remember all the details, but I do remember hearing that it was kind of a phased out approach to getting rid of OPEB. And at one point in time, it covered the employee and a spouse. And I think right before it got phased out, it was just for the employee. And James or Wes, if you have any other information, I'd be thankful.
I'll cover it real quick. So previously, actually, it covered employee, spouse, and children and dependents. That was phased out. And now if you do cover a spouse currently, it will cover an employee and spouse as you retire. It has to be whatever benefit plan you're on as of your date of retirement. So if you retire and the next day you get married, you can't then add your spouse.
Gotcha. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah,
I think
Director Olitharp, if I can add one thing, and Wes, help me out here. So for the previous item with the PERS UAL, that was all for what we call the classic employees, I think, right?
Yes.
We have this whole new generation of employees. Back in 2013, 2014, the state passed the Public Employees Pension Reform Act, or PEPRA, which limited the amount of benefit and the type of retirement benefits you can offer to new employees. So the big UAL, the big amount of money we're talking about is for the classic employees, the one that had the richer retirement benefits. For the PEPRA employees, that UAL, if there is any at all, it's very small. But currently, almost close to 25% of our current employees are PEPRA employees. So we're over time, the classic employees retire or move on, and we hire new employees, and those new employees can't be classic anymore, so they're PEPRA. So that's further lessening the liability and the financial demands on the district to pay for retirement benefits.
Yeah, that's assuming that they weren't in CalP or somewhere else.
True, good point. Thank you for that. So for Director Boyd Hodgson's benefit, if we hire somebody from another district or some other agency that was already a classic employee, when they come over to us, they retain their classic employee status. So all agencies back in 2013, 2014, when PEPRA came in, agencies had the opportunity to create what's called a tier 2 retirement plan. The district did not do that. And what tier 2 would have meant is that if you pulled somebody, if we had a tier 2, and if we brought somebody over who was a classic, we would bring them in under a different lower retirement plan. But now, to our benefit, we get to, it's a very attractive benefit. So when we want to try to lure people from other agencies to come work for Vallecitos, we can say, hey, we can honor your classic employee status. And thanks for that, helpful with that clarification, Director Olitharp.
Yeah, so Glenn, the unfunded accrued liability for the PEPRA members is $137,000
Yeah.
as of June 30th, 2020. So it's a very small amount, and it's a much cheaper benefit as new employees come in. The cost of the PEPRA isn't very much. It's 4.62, I think, for the employer.
Yeah.
One thing I would like to mention is that because PERS is making all these changes, and I think being more fiscally responsible, their investments now are much more practical, and they've got a sustainable plan. I mean, they have over $472 billion in assets. And as of the 2021, they're saying that the total public employment retirement fund, or the PERF, is actually 82% funded. So PERS is stable. There's no concern as far as, them paying their, it's not like people's concerns over Social Security, I don't think. So it's a stable and sustainable plan.
And I think they learned from 2009, the painful experience of that. So
Yeah.
they
Yeah, they
lost
seem
a
to-
lot that year.
Yeah, they seem to have made some good changes.
All right,
Okay.
Wes, anything else?
That's all for me. See if we can go back to the budget party page. There you go.
All right. All right. Well, seeing no other business or questions, I think we're adjourned.
Okay, and I'll be sending something out to all of you to confirm the dates that Wes showed on the slide for the upcoming meetings.
Okay, great. Thanks, Wes and
Okay,
Mike.
thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for all the
Thank
hard
you.
work.
Good
Have a great
afternoon.
day.
Bye-bye.